Everyone likes to say model costs have fallen over time. Frontier model costs have not fallen much over time.
But if I'm an enterprise and I'm starting to see how these open source models are getting better, is that where we are heading?
All of the open weight models right now come from China, very few from America. The way a compute contract works today is a 3 to 5 year lock-in with 30% down. Good luck.
Well, I could push back on every one of those.
What's the cost of KIMI today? KIMI K3 is the best model probably.
Yes, correct.
KIMI K3 is not cheap. It is very expensive, actually. It's $15 per million output tokens. Opus is, I think, at 25. KIMI is a 2.8 trillion parameter model. Once you get to that intelligence and that scale, they're not going to be cheap either. Man, if I had $1 for every time I Glean, someone said, hey, let's just post-train Llama, it's going to be as good as GPT. Most people don't know how to post-train models or do anything with those weights either. So the fact that it's open weight is just a pat on the back, but you're not actually doing anything with the open weights.
What are the couple things you're looking to key in on?
Most species do not try the product that they're investing in.
Let's go rapid fire. Suno, Whisperflow, Goodfire, Pangram. OpenRouter has been in the news recently. More headwinds or tailwinds in the last 6 months?
I think the biggest headwinds are going to be that, people like it.
Hey climbers, welcome back to this episode of Climb. I'm Jay Kapoor, General Partner of VSC Ventures, and I'll be your host today. I'm so thrilled to have on the show today my friend Deedy Das, who is a partner at Menlo Ventures, invests out of their most recent $1.4 billion fund, and also co-leads their Anthology Fund alongside Anthropic. Deedy may be one of the most well-read VCs on artificial intelligence, whether it's his writings on the chip wars, the latest model races, on how money is flowing through the industry, or where capital is getting allocated in artificial intelligence. If you're not following him today, you absolutely should be. Before investing, he was a founding engineer at Glean and was an engineer on Google Search before that. Today, we're going to get into a whole range of topics, including what happens as frontier models keep accelerating, what that means for the open source race and companies like OpenRouter in his portfolio. We'll do a quick fire through some of his existing portfolios and see if the last 6 months have brought more tailwinds or headwinds. And we're also going to talk about whether it is a more exciting or frustrating time to build an AI. All that and more together. But before we start, I just want to say, Deedy, thank you so much for joining me on Climb.
Thank you for having me, Jay. It's been a while.
We've been trying to make this happen, and I'm glad we finally did. And I'm glad we're having this conversation now because in the last 6 months, so much in AI has changed. And the show is all about how does AI change what we build and back. So just to highlight, right, in the last 6 months, since January, KIMI K3 came out with near frontier quality open source model. There's a new $1 billion Neo lab popping up seemingly every single day. And software investors that wouldn't touch hardware have now all pivoted to physical AI, and they're calling me up asking me what's in my portfolio. So you also have been thinking about the physical world because you put out this really great market map on the different 8 attack vectors that Nvidia is facing. Let's start at the kind of 10,000 foot view. As VCs, we write checks with a view to the 10-year horizon. How do you build a decade-long thesis when things are changing as quickly as they are today?
It's quite tricky. See, the thing I ask myself is I've only been doing this job for 2.5 years. So who am I to know what the future holds? But what I can add is I'm first and foremost a technologist. And I think that I don't think anyone can predict, obviously, 10 years into the future. I can barely predict 2 weeks into the future. So the way I look at investing is actually quite simple. I know there's this whole hullabaloo about should I be in long-term projects, energy, power, nuclear, physical, hardware, where I know that if I do a bunch of R&D up front, maybe in 10 years, I can really reap the rewards of that, versus something like software where who knows, the ground can sort of move under my feet. But I think the way to think about business is very simple. It is fundamentally, if somebody else were to start exactly this business 1 or 2 years or N years from now, why could they never compete with you? For the longest time, software was a big bottleneck. So you could just hire a bunch of engineers, build some software tool, sometimes usually sell it to enterprise. And that friction itself was so large that it was unlikely that somebody would also build that software team, also build that enterprise team and do all of the above. However, what hasn't changed is good products are good products and they're quite sticky. And I know we'll talk about all these companies later, but a lot of the companies that I like to invest in are first and foremost good products. And if I had a dime for every time on Twitter someone came and said, hey, I can vibe code this in N minutes, I'm like, great, you should. The reality is you should vibe code it in 10 minutes. And if that is better than the product, then I'm obviously not done my job, right? But the reality is products are way more than a little bit of functionality. I mean, we used to have this joke back in college where, one of our college projects was, can you rebuild a version of Facebook?
Yeah.
Right?
It's a rite of passage for any person taking a computer science class to try to build their own Facebook. Yes.
But the defensibility of Facebook is not that it's hard to build the UI and hard to build a like button and hard to build it's all your friends are on it. The network effects are quite strong. So when I look at products that are good, I think about, hey, what are the network effects that can make this A, grow very quickly, and B, is there a long tail of things that are totally non-obvious in terms of perfection in that product that most people aren't going to do. And if those things are true, I think software is fairly defensible. Because you can vibe code something, sure, but are you actually going to vibe code it and fundraise for it and hire some engineers and hire marketing? If you can, then compete. And so that's how I see one section of my investment.
At the stage you're investing at, what are the things that you're picking up on in that product? Let's call it the product experience, right? I don't want it to be just about the product or the software itself, but you say, founder comes into the room or the first conversation you're having with them. What are the couple things you're looking to key in on to see if this is the right?
Well, one of the most wild things to me when I first enter venture is how little most VCs look at the actual product that they're investing in. I mean, this as well as I do. What do VCs generally see? They see a founder come in, they see a deck. Most VCs do not try the product that they're investing in. And they do not actually know what the product is or whether it's good or whether it's bad. And that blew my mind. Because if I had it my way, I would just look at your code and be like, I don't really need your pitch. Let me just look at your code and try to figure out whether this is a good idea or not. Obviously, a little bit of hyperbole there. But what I try to do is say, like, hey, how can I just play with it? And I've built products for a long time. So I'd like to believe, like, at some point, if I play with your product, I have a little bit of an intuition of the work you've done here. Like, okay, you've thought about this, you've thought about that. How does it compare to everybody else? So there's a qualitative aspect of that, of just, hey, does this actually work? Does it work well? How does it actually compare to everybody else? Because it's trivial to put in good numbers in a deck and have a, boisterous founder who can have a very charismatic presentation. I mean, that's kind of table stakes. But can you actually build the product? Besides the qualitative metrics, obviously a lot of VCs look at quantitative metrics, but stats can lie all the time. So it's really about what quantitative metrics you look at.
Well, we've changed the definition of what ARR is today, right? When I started in venture 11 years ago, ARR was annually recurring revenue. And now I'd say 2.5 years ago, somebody decided that we're just going to call it annualized run rate. And we all just agreed that suddenly that was the new ARR. And it's kind of bullshit, right? You take your best month and you multiply it by 12 and suddenly here you are. I don't even think we're at a state in venture today where we can all agree on which metrics matter.
I don't even look at those metrics. Barely. I look at ARR and stuff. Like that's kind of table stakes also. I'm looking at product metrics. This is where I spend most of my time. Yeah, I'm obviously, again, hyperbole. I'm going to look at your ARR. I'm going to look at how you do your math. I'm going to look how you do your accounting. But often I'm at seed A and B. At seed A and B, the amount of data I have at best is going to be beta on the market. Everyone sees that data. Every firm knows that data. Every firm knows how to slice and dice it a gazillion ways and look at your cohort retention curve. Great. What I really want to look at is, what are your product metrics? And if there was one, I would look at, does a new user come back to your product? Do you have product retention? Yeah. And if you do, how often do they use your product? Mm-hmm. If you have those two things, I can underwrite way more multiples of your ARR than I believe other firms can. So that's what I look at. And the reason I'm obsessed with it is because when I was at Meta or at Google, it was just sort of drilled into us. Like we know sort of how big products run and how they work and what really matters. And ultimately the thing that matters is if a new user comes in, are they going to stick or not? Yeah. And if they can stick, I'm willing to take a bet you could probably monetize them in X, Y, and Z cases.
When you think about the models themselves and how they are changing, OpenRouter has been in the news recently. There's acquisition rumors. I won't ask you to comment on them because they'll put you in a weird spot. But I do want to understand two different bets that you've made. One on Anthropic, which is, the leading frontier model, And then the other on OpenRouter, which is saying, hey, we don't care who the leading model is. We'll write you to the right model for the job. Can those two investments coexist, or are they a hedge against each other?
It's a great question. I think they absolutely coexist. This is not like a dancing around the topic. Here's the reality, and OpenRouter's data shows this too. Is there going to be a different model for different qualities and different parts of the Pareto frontier? The Pareto frontier is essentially you draw a line, put on one axis quality, on the other axis you want to put latency, you want to put cost. And then you look at the models and where they fall on that frontier, and everyone has a different sort of view. I mean, similar, like, I don't know, take an analogy of cars. You might want to drive a Ferrari, you might want to drive a Camry, they're different for different people. Now, unlike cars, in models, what we see empirically is most of the dollars, and I think not even most of the tokens, but really most of the dollars go to frontier.
Yes.
People want to use the best models.
Yeah.
That is not inconsistent with the fact that for many other things, people don't need to use the best models.
Yeah.
You probably are not doing yourself a favor if you're using Fable to, I don't know, do some basic text classification.
I was so mad I asked Fable to move our calendar meeting, and then I looked at how many tokens it ate up to do that, and I was like, oh, I forgot to switch the model. I'm right there with you. It is, we're in this weird situation right now where the cognitive load of having to figure out what model to use for what is on me.
Exactly.
So sorry, please continue.
And that's fascinating, because what OpenRouter says is actually really interesting. I think it goes back to the fact that I think most people just don't try the product. OpenRouter, most people do not use OpenRouter to route tokens. In fact, very few people use OpenRouter to route tokens. OpenRouter, the name is a bit of a misnomer. It can route tokens. It is a feature. Most people just use OpenRouter to have one API so they can choose which models they go to. And then they bring, usually if they have to route, they will bring it in-house. OpenRouter is a beautiful product just because of the simplicity of what it wanted to promise and what it delivered. It came with the idea of saying, well, let me just tell you the whole.
Yeah, start with the story.
When I was at Glean, prior to when I was in venture, I was on the founding team of Glean, and I was leading a couple of teams to lead our product divisions. And one of our AI products was called Glean Assistant. Glean Assistant would then be served to a bunch of enterprises that we served, and different enterprises had different model needs. So some of them were like, hey, we want GPT. Some of them only want Claude. Some of them we want Gemini. I believe at that time, circa 2023, those were the only three models anyone cared about. Some people were very on Llama, but whatever.
Yeah, DeepSeek didn't happen for a couple of years.
DeepSeek didn't happen at the time. So 3 or 4 models to support. And we had to build sort of support for all those models. And very quickly, if you're in a software engineer, you realize, okay, well, these models kind of all have the same shape, but they're kind of different. So let's build a layer on top. And then, it'll hit one endpoint. And then we will figure out, it'll set a config and say, for this customer, serve that. For this customer, serve that. For this customer, serve that. Very simple product. And I was like, okay, well, this is dirt simple. It took a few engineers a couple weeks to build. Great. That's it. Turns out it was very annoying to maintain, because every few weeks I'd be like, oh man, there's a new model, but I have all this other stuff I want to build. Like, okay, well, we'll support the new model. How difficult can it be? And over time, I started to realize that's the shape of problem I love. Simple at first. Everyone thinks they can do it. This is how you avoid competition. Everyone thinks they can do it. But as you really get into the weeds, you're like, okay, this is kind of annoying, and I'm really not going to do this. So even at that time, I remember some of our customers, some big tech players, they were all building this inside. We weren't unique, but everyone was kind of building their own routing thing. And I'm like, okay, well, this is kind of.
If everybody's building the same thing.
Yeah. They're obviously not going to all hire teams. They're obviously not all going to build their internal router system. And I was kind of out there when I was in venture looking for this company. And so there's a couple of properties. I'm like, which company does a good aggregation, a single API that hits all models? And is it just a beautiful product and easy to use? And then when I met Alex, it was just rubber meets the road. And what he did very well was, if you think about what OpenRouter actually gives you now, they have 400 different providers, and they have, hundreds of different models. You are absolutely not going to sign up on all of these different websites that have a model release, right? No one's going to actually do that. No one's going to figure out how to make API fit the same spec that your, actual code needs. No one's going to do all that. So you hit OpenRouter, and then you select what you want. And there's a couple of nice benefits that come out of that. Even if you only want to use Claude models have more uptime on OpenRouter than Anthropic. Why? Because what's under OpenRouter? Anthropic and GCP and AWS. So if one is down, it just puts you to the other. The routing is only just a fallback. So you get the best uptime on any given model. You get access to every given model. And what do you have to do in terms of a business model to make it work? You pay a small fee on top. That's as simple as it is. And they did that simple thing again and again and again and again, and they grew like wildfire. At some point, this is how a marketplace works. At some point, you are trying to cover for all the models. And then at some point, the models come to you. Because they're like, look, I'm a new model. I want to launch. You clearly already have the demand. Can you put me on your product? And that's the beautiful flywheel. More and more, proprietary launches come to OpenRouter first. So in many cases, some of the models would only be accessible on OpenRouter. Just basic stuff. And they just did the basic stuff really, really well. Incredible business. And so that's what I love.
No, I think you made a very good case for the existing models and why OpenRouter works. You said one thing here that I will maybe push back on a little bit, right? Which is, if you can vibe code it, you can. Now, if we use a consumer argument or just an everyday person argument, yeah, you could vibe code your own calendar. You're probably better off using Gmail Calendar, right? And it's so freaking cheap to use. Why would you vibe code it? It would just be a waste of time and energy. But if I'm an enterprise and I'm starting to see how these open source models are getting better, and I am looking at my token maxing engineers who for the last year, I gave them free reign. I said, spend, baby, spend. And then I don't know if you saw the reports in the last couple of weeks where now CFOs are all basically saying thrift maxing is the new thing. Are we headed towards a world with increasingly better open source frontier-esque models where enterprises say, I don't know if I necessarily need to be buying the most frontier model from the best lab. I need to start building my own internal, LLMs, because I can take a model and then take an open source model with my own weights and distill it for my own purposes. Is that where we are heading?
Let me just hit that question head on, and then I'll tell you some thoughts on it. Ultimately, every company is a little bit different on how they think about these things. Yes, I've also been hearing these things everywhere, but let's just think about what is the price a company pays when they have when they reach a point where they're like, hey, maybe we should just do it ourselves. You have to acquire compute yourself. The way a compute contract works today is a 3 to 5 year lock-in with 30% down. Good luck. If you want to do that, go for it. Be my guest. 2, you have to place an immense bet on what you believe the future is going to be. You have to believe that open source, open weight models are going to be close to frontier and close to where you want, that you can actually host them on the compute that you have. And 3, you're going to have to believe that, all of the open weight models right now come from China and very few from America now, and you just have to believe that continues to happen. Once you believe all of that, you also then have to believe the closed source models don't just get drastically better, and you're locked into this thing that you've paid a bunch of money for. And the economics of the amount of money you have to spend to buy yourself open source capacity are not that great either.
Well, I could push back on every one of those if you want. So we are compute constrained today, but if you listen to Jensen, you say in the next 2 to 3 years, that compute constraint is going to go away. The reason we're at it now is that demand is far outstripping supply, but we are building supply, and we are maybe 24 to 36 months away from having more supply. Okay, so yes, you have to maybe invest in your compute today, and you're paying a little bit more as a setup, but as you scale up compute in the future, you can believe that it will become more accessible. The next thing that you're going to say is that these open weight models will continue to be as close to frontier as possible. I mean, if these guys are distilling, again, if China can do it, we can do it here. If they're distilling at the rate that they're doing and they're getting 80% better for 1/100th the cost, okay, then I would believe that.
What's the cost of KIMI today?
What's the cost of distillation today?
Of KIMI today. KIMI K3 is the best model, probably.
Yes, correct. Yeah. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head.
KIMI K3 is not cheap.
It is not.
It is very expensive, actually.
Okay.
It's $15 per million output tokens. If you look at that, $15 per million output tokens, Opus is, I think, at 25. They're not that much cheaper at that scale. Once you get to, KIMI is a 2.8 trillion parameter model. Once you get to that intelligence and that scale, they're not going to be cheap either. And I think this is the risk that I advise companies to think about. the companies who are doing this aren't in the business of giving away free things. They're going to give away free things until they can, charge for those free things. You already see some whisperings around what KIMI wants to do in terms of the contractual obligations to how people use their weights. I mean, that's going to continue. So, okay, you're not actually getting anything cheaper. Most people don't know how to post-train models or do anything with those weights either. So the fact that it's open weight is just a pat on the back that I can host this, great. But you're not actually doing anything with the open weights. So you have that side of the argument. And we've seen this story before. We've seen this story like 2 years ago when everyone was talking about fine-tuning models and everyone was talking about having their own thing. And man, if I had $1 for every time I Glean, someone said, hey, let's just post-train Llama, it's going to be as good as GPT. You're going to go down this rabbit hole where you're going to spend eng resources, compute resources, get big lock-ins, or you can just use the best model.
Yeah.
And you're paying a price. I'm not saying you should just pay infinite amount of money. You should do some spend management, right? If it's really burning the bank, you should do some spend management. But I don't think the answer to that is, okay, let's do a way worse option. I actually think for the most part, these are way worse options. If there are certain tasks where KIMI is good for you, use it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like, this is stopping you from doing that. But it's not that much cheaper. And if you move your entire company stack onto it, then what it's very likely that Claude's going to get better before KIMI is.
Yeah, I guess it's the same argument that people who are going back to on-prem are making about AWS, right? Hard to know, but if we look at just how economics typically goes and how venture-backed economics typically goes, most stuff is cheaper when it is venture subsidized. Uber rides to the airport used to cost $25, now they cost $150. Are we to expect the same thing to happen with frontier class models? Today, I get a ton of Fable for $200 a month. Am I headed toward, and you don't have to use Anthropic necessarily, but just any of these frontier class models, are we headed towards a world where, as the venture capital dollars dry up, naturally the cost of inference is going to go up?
Everyone likes to say model costs have fallen over time. That's broadly true if you're looking at non-frontier. Frontier model costs have not fallen much over time. They've been sort of, if you even go back to the day, maybe $50 per million sometimes it's 15, but usually hovers between like a 15 to 50 million per million tokens in terms of output. Now, the questions are, what are the different forces on that price? Well, the obvious force is competition. And so Uber, far less a duopoly than the situation we're in today. Not to offend anybody, but Uber Lyft is very different from, I think, OpenAI, Anthropic today. And that doesn't even consider, Groq, Meta, and Google all want to play ball. And so it is going to be competitive. And when you're in a competitive environment, you will face pricing pressure at the very.
Well, we saw it recently. I mean, Fable was supposed to leave everybody's max accounts, and then you see the GPT 5.5 comes out, and now you see KIMI comes out, and suddenly, okay, actually, in order to stay competitive, we need to have that. I buy that completely. I think competition on the whole as a user in this space is going to be a net benefit for us.
Situation, I think the competition here doesn't go away.
Right.
It doesn't go away unless people find it just not economical. That's one part of the story. And the second part of the story is just the cost associated with it. And we're ultimately in the biggest compute crunch of all time. It is, when I talk to any of my startups, they're like, man, it is impossible for me to get any sort of meaningful amount of compute. Definitely for inference, but also even worse for training. All of the compute is locked up. And I think that's ultimately going to be the biggest constraint. So as long as you believe that couple of things to believe. Frontier is going to be big, so better lesson build. And B, demand is going to be at frontier. Then we are always going to be in a state of people are going to go for compute. There's going to be like less than 5 players who realistically have access to that kind of compute, and they're just going to compete each other on.
Yeah, I mean, the big players will run everybody off the table with their dollars.
I do want to address the other point where you said, like, yeah, things are getting expensive for companies. The right question that I would ask is, which companies are things getting expensive for? Okay. And the reality is, or at least like from what I've heard, the companies that are feeling the burden of Fable the most, that have been loud about it, maybe the Coinbases of the world, are companies that are at a scale where you have thousands of engineers, where ostensibly, if you take a step back in the day, when would you hire more software engineers? It was sort of like a back of the hand thing. It was like, my revenue goes up, well, I should probably hire some more. There was no no one will sit here and do a spreadsheet of here's the ROI on a software engineer.
Average revenue per employee.
Yeah, they do some average revenue for employee, and they're like, let's get some more on there. Now, would people sit and measure hey, how much is that incremental engineer actually adding to my top line? No, I mean they'll be like, kind of, it's working. Our business is fine. Our margins are consistent. Let's continue hiring. Teams seem to want more capacity, so let's keep doing that. Today's world, it looks a lot like that, except if you suddenly dumped a million engineers into the company because you have these tokens. And now people are realizing, well, actually, if you continue to scale the amount of, just call it IQ points in the company, at some scale, I don't actually see reward, right? Before, it was kind of I'm kind of seeing it because I'm kind of forcing it to be the case because I'm only scaling my engineers as my revenue scales. But now you're okay, I have tons of not engineers, but engineers plus tokens. And now I'm spending this amount, and all of a sudden I'm not seeing it reflect in my top line. So I'm feeling the crunch. And I get that. And I think for those companies, if you're feeling the crunch, I don't have the solution, but yeah, maybe not spend infinite amount of money on tokens if you're not feeling the ROI. Yeah. But I don't think that's the case for most companies. If I'm an early stage startup, or I'm a company that primarily doesn't do R&D, man, you would really, really benefit from spending a lot more on tokens. The kind of gains you get are actually quite good. Yeah. And, another analogy I like to make is, why does Google hire the smartest engineers? It's not because they've done some science and figured out that the smartest engineers are going to give me the highest ROI on ads. They hire the smartest engineers because they're well, fuck yeah, we're a number one company. So the reason people use Fable is not always because they think I need the smartest IQ points, but they're look, at the very limit, I need the best.
Yeah.
So if you look at a quant shop, do you think they'll ever use anything else that's not Frontier?
No. That's their edge, right? How they build off of that Frontier model is because if everybody has access to it, which I'm sure Google, thinks about the same way, everybody has access to these engineers, I need to go and get the best ones. Same argument for a quant shop, same argument for anybody else. So
exactly.
Yeah. So I buy the argument there. What I would love to kind of think on is how, kind of turning it back to some of the startups that we invest in, because as great as the 10,000 foot view is, I'm sure you have portfolio companies that are looking at the ground shifting beneath their feet. Many of them are in software. Last 6 months, everybody's going, where are the moats? What matters? We talked about that a little bit. Let's go rapid fire through some of your portfolio companies. Had the last 6 months created more headwinds or tailwinds, and why? And we'll go through them quickly, and we can double click on ones that matter. Fair warning, if you say everything is a tailwind, I will push back. Suno
has just been a phenomenal business. It's one of those things where when I heard about the business for the first time, I was like, I don't really get why people would do this. Over time, I realized, man, the number of people who have this latent desire to create music is just amazing. I mean, I should have thought about all of my banker friends who want to be DJs on the side, but there is a lot of people who get a lot of joy just creating music. So that business has continued to be absolutely amazing. I think one of the things I love about the product is very few of the other labs are going to be focused on music. It is a regulatory nightmare. It is also just doesn't seem like what's in their bread and butter where, most of the money is, or most of the intelligence is, it's not a verifiable task. It is definitely a bit of art and science combined. And what I love is that they've created that model and they've married it with such a beautiful product. And I think there's just so much magic happening there that I don't know how or if anyone will want to compete. And Suno continues to rip it.
I think the ease of use and the accessibility, especially with something like music, really anything in the arts, the more accessible it is, the more that my dad used it to create a song for my sister's wedding in October, a custom song for her. And I was like, yeah, this is a really great use case for somebody who wouldn't necessarily go and try to create this on their own. So I like that product, which is why I brought it up. Whisperflow, we brought them up a little bit earlier. More headwinds or tailwinds in the last 6 months?
Generally more, I would say it's a bit mixed, right? Because I think the biggest headwinds for Whisper are going to be that, people like it. And when people like something, like I said before, yes, people will try to clone it, but other people with distribution are a threat.
Yeah.
So if you look at ChatGPT trying to put in their own voice, they're going to do it. Claude wants to put in their own voice, they're going to do it. The OS layer, Apple obviously has been way too long.
Siri's been around for a long
It's been way too long, but they want to give it another go.
Sure.
So I think while Whisper continues to be a phenomenal business and the numbers look great, I really think about what the next 2 or 3 years look like. And I worry that the fact that everyone's woken up to voice being important. And a lot of the people who have woken up have distribution that Whisper will not have overnight. So that's my main fear there.
Okay. Goodfire. That's a new one.
Yeah. Goodfire is a company that I think is the number one company in the world in terms of talent that works on mechanistic interpretability. What mechanistic interpretability is it's saying most LLMs, but also other AI models that we know of today that are deep learning models, have billions and billions of parameters, but we don't actually understand what they do. So namely, if I were to say, hey, what happens if you put this query into ChatGPT, nobody at OpenAI would tell you what's going to happen. They just can explain what the weights are going to do, but ultimately the response is sort of, that's what the black box said.
Yeah.
Goodfire, mechanistic interpretability, is the study of those weights to try to figure out what is actually going on in the model. And that includes, what is the model feeling? Anthropic also did a great post on what the J space is. What is the model's introspection as they're going through things? Are they trying to, go around you? Are they malicious? Are they actually trying to help you? Do they feel like they're in a stressed environment where they have to behave a certain way or not? Do they feel like they have certain knowledge about certain things versus not? Are they censoring themselves because they've been post-trained to? So it's really the understanding of where the model is without having to actually look at the outputs at all.
Give me the use case of why somebody cares about that. And I'm not thinking about the average person talking to GPT or Claude. Why does a startup user or an enterprise customer actually care about understanding what the black box is outputting?
Well, there's a couple of different reasons. I'll give you 2 different arguments on it. One is the open weight argument. With the open weight argument, think about, a good analogy is why would we invest in neurosurgery when for the brain? Ostensibly, because if something's wrong with the way these models are, you can change it. If you want the models to behave in a certain way, you can change it. If you want models to not behave in a certain way, you can change it too. So it has, without things I can't talk about, with fundamental breakthrough, it actually changes the way you can train it and post-train LLMs and change their open weight behavior for economics that are orders of magnitude different than standard methods. That's one. Then it comes to how it could benefit anyone who is a NeoLab or another model lab, which is, if you think of what it means to recursively self-improve, a part of the recursive self-improvement involves understanding how the model weights are changing. Yeah. You can't really understand how the model weights are changing unless you interpret the weights. It's the only real way we have, minus benchmarks. But benchmarks are slow and they're tedious and they only see a point in time, like a small set of things. So you have the slow, tedious, expensive, and somewhat non-complete method versus someone which can tell you, yeah, this is exactly what the model is doing right now. Currently, a lot of the work they do commercially is actually with people who've developed models in pharma. Yeah. So genomics models, which are notoriously hard to understand what the inputs and outputs even are. What's actually going on in a genome? Can we interpret what sort of parts of the DNA sequence are responsible for what different attributes in humans? So they did this paper in Nature where they found novel biomarkers to Alzheimer's that were never found before just by studying those models. So there's all of these really interesting use cases. And I think the challenge in that company is really figuring out, like, okay, there's a lot we can do here. Where is the focus and where do you want to go? And there are going to be some new announcements on that very soon.
Okay, I'm excited. Why don't we finish on one recent one? Let's talk about Pangram.
Pangram is just one of my favorite companies, just both personally and as an investor. We just announced our investment in them today. I've been following these guys ever since their product came out. Pangram is, an AI detector. There have been many in the past. Most of them never really worked. We have this classic example that goes viral every once in a while of how the Declaration of Independence is actually written by AI. The techniques that Pangram uses to detect whether both writing and now images are AI or not are just bitter lesson build, meaning they figure out how to scale a deep learning model to make that decision, and it gets into a lot of granularity. So, for example, it not only tells you if it's AI or not, it'll tell you which parts are AI, which parts are not, which parts may be AI assisted, which parts are not. In an image, it'll tell you, hey, this part completely AI, this part, no, that's human. So it has that level of granularity too. And I think as we think about what the future holds in terms of how much of the internet is just AI slop, in my opinion. There is a use case for AI written context. You know, if I'm sending an email, I don't really care if you said something in AI or not. But when I'm writing something, I think a lot of the audience really cares. You're almost breaching the trust agreement with your audience when you are using an AI written piece, but you're putting it under your own.
Let's talk about what happened with, we should talk about what happened with Brian from Airbnb. And hacked or not, for those that don't have the context, there was a long piece posted from his Twitter account talking about, crypto and stable coins and whatnot. And, Pangram rated it 100% AI generated. And it broke a ton of trust in this era of CEOs going direct for someone to go, oh man, you didn't care enough to write this. I wonder if that's just temporary. That's just the moment we are in, and generational attitudes are going to change in the future, where you write really beautifully, you think, about what you're writing, and you're kind of putting a lot of thought into it, and so people care and they respond. But is that just a temporary thing? And eventually folks are just going to be okay with...
People say that, and I have a more strong opinion. Well, I have two views. I have the more Pangram view, and then I have my view. Yeah. The Pangram view is whether or not you want to take your own decision on whether you like to read something that's AI generated, you can find value from that or not. At least you should know if it's AI generated, and then, if you want to read it, go for it. No stopping you from reading it. But most people would want to know than not. So that's the sort of the easier view. In my view, I'm a little bit more opinionated on this, which is I don't want to read it. Like straight up. I don't care how useful it is.
You see that M dash and you say, fuck off.
No, I'm not reading it. Look, it's I don't have we all have very limited amount of time in our lives. I want to know what you have to say. I don't want to know what an LLM tells you have to say. And if you are going to put something good through an LLM, then you've just lost some people, unfortunately. Yeah. I'll read it in my email. I'll read it in docs that don't matter, some things like that. But when it comes to things like social, when it comes to obviously assignments in school, I have a very low tolerance for that. But the last thing I'll say on Pangram, which I think is quite, one more thing to say there is, I always ask my VC friends who are, if they say things like maybe that'll change, I will be like, man, if in the future, you're the ones who are going to fund people with AI generated slide decks, I gladly welcome it.
Oh yeah,
please do it.
No, you spot on.
You should absolutely do that.
Really, really hates getting a cloudified deck with the little thing on the side and the one bullet and the top thing. See, it's all about pattern recognition ultimately. And if you're seeing so many of these things, I say this about my perspective on this with anything related to design, or really any art, but let's just use design as a simple thing. Good design only stands out in contrast to what is, right? So if everybody is doing the same thing, then what we have done is raise the floor, not the ceiling. And so the people who actually are going to spend the time and think about it and stand out and understand, what are the aspects that are going to evoke an emotion? When you're putting a pitch text story together, you're putting a story together. Everybody can write a 3-act structure. A 3-act structure is not why you go watch a movie. You go watch a movie because it moves you in some way. And I think it's the same thing with writing. It's the same thing with a pitch deck. I can get on my soapbox on this for days, but you can raise the floor as much as you want. And for maybe 80% of people, that'll be enough. It's the remaining 20% that actually give a shit, or whatever percentage that actually give a shit, that are always going to stand out. So used to be, you could go and raise, $5 million on white PowerPoint with Comic Sans text. You can't do that anymore. You can maybe go do it on a Claude deck. And once everybody's raising on a Claude deck, nobody will raise on a Claude deck. So that I'm right there. I'm right there with you. Let's take the flip side of it. We talked about some really great companies that you've invested in so far. What is one where you passed because you had, some sort of prior beliefs, and now looking back, you've changed your priors?
Well, I'll preface it by saying I don't like looking. I track my anti-portfolio very religiously. I don't like looking at companies that have grown since I've passed and count that as a loss, because who knows? The jury is still out. So I look at just companies who have actually exited in some meaningful way and go okay, well that's a no if I passed on that. So the one that comes to mind the most is Groq with a Q. That one was really interesting. It was a chip company.
Yeah, Jonathan.
They make SRAM Jonathan. just spent a lot of time on that. I really like Jonathan. One of my buddies, Sunny, was on
Moderate.
Sunny Moderate was there. It's a painful one, and this is one of the weird things about venture, as you know, which is I think we did the right thing in many ways. We looked at the economics. We worked our way through what the hardware is, how is it going to scale? Is it going to make money, even though it's a new differentiated fast token processing hardware? And the conclusion we came to are the economics, I don't see them working. The unit economics do not work on Groq. So we would have to bet completely on that changing. I think that conclusion was broadly correct. However, Nvidia then goes buys it for $20 billion. So that's a 10x loss in like less than a year on a big amount of money. So that one I view as a miss in some ways. Most of the other misses have been in two categories. It's been I was too afraid to pay a high valuation on something that I should probably just paid it. And then second is kind of a variation of that, which is those examples are things like a cognition or something.
But no. Let's talk about I probably should have paid that price, because that is the number one thing that our peers say. And again, I invest a little bit earlier than you do, but our peers will say, Jay, you got to play the game on the field. Okay, I know a seed round used to be 20 or 25. Now it's 50. F you, play the game on the field. Is that just something you get to say because you invest on behalf of one of the 30 funds that have taken 80% of venture capital, and the rest of us are still trying to figure out like, hey, entry price still matters. So when does entry price still matter at Menlo, and when do you have to revise your priors and throw it out the window?
I mean, look, the reality is it's such a hard thing to have a cut and fast rule with. Like, there's always exceptions, and sometimes you're going to get them really wrong and look really stupid. And the reality is when you pay a social cost of doing some of these deals. And if you're wrong, you look like an absolute idiot, and you should. And if you're right, good for you. You get to reap some rewards. And for us, that deal was obviously Anthropic. It made no fucking sense, right? Like there's nothing about Anthropic on finances that made sense at the Series C and Series D when we invested, right? We led Series D, we did the Series C. Those are, I think, 4 and 15, if I'm not wrong. Mm-hmm. They barely had any revenue at 4 and 15. Mm-hmm. It was an absolute flyer. So you look at that and you can say, okay, well, maybe I should pay $4 billion for every single NeoLab, and that would probably be a bad idea, right? And so ultimately, our jobs are tricky in the sense that there are some times you make exceptions and that will return everything. And then there's some times where if you keep doing dumb things, if you do a thing that's dumb, then you lose all the money.
Well, that's the power law for you, right? You just have to be smart or lucky once, and sometimes it's hard to know which is which. But as long as the scale of the you're right is big enough, nobody remembers the other 29. And so now, having done this over a decade, it is a very humbling piece of it, because there are times that I look back and I go,
what are your biggest regrets?
Was I smart or was I lucky? Honestly, the true answer is I don't look back very often. I try to take a lesson from it. If the lesson is about price, I usually just come back to the adage that my mentor in venture had, which is two things. One, your fund size is your strategy. And that still very much is true, even if you are looking at the size of the outcomes becoming 10 billion or 50 billion when they used to be 1 to 5 billion. The other is venture is a get rich slow scheme. And the second piece of it, I think this industry maybe has forgotten the last couple of years. And you're seeing that in the attitudes of the LPs change a little bit too, where they're going, hey, why would I get into a fund with a 8, 10 year hold period when I could be doing an SPV that 3X's my money in a year or 18 months? That's never been how money has been made in venture long term. You might go talk to people in 99 and say, actually, yeah, we were making money in .com. And then for 25 years, it didn't happen. And now we're kind of back in that cycle again. To me, I come back to the first principle of what are the not cyclical, but systemic problems? We talked about off mic. A lot of my thesis is based on labor shortages. I look at an industry and I go, is there a labor shortage? Okay. Can technology solve for it? Okay. Who's the best founder building it? Let me go find that guy or girl and put money into it. Coming back to another thing that you wrote that I really enjoyed was talking about the CS degree. I went to Carnegie Mellon. A lot of my close friends did that CS degree 10, 15 years ago. Enrollment in CS is down, I think, at the lowest it's been in the last 3 years. And there are, 19-year-olds out there today saying, in a world where LLMs can do all the coding, what the heck is the point studying technology and CS? Where do you think that goes? And, if you're advising a younger cousin or a family friend who is 19 today, make the case for studying technology, computer science, engineering.
I've really flipped around on this a bunch of times, and I would say, the reality is I'm not, you have to toe the line between idealism and pragmatism when it comes to giving career advice, right? Because on the idealistic side, it's really like, to a large extent, it's still really do what you love and do what you get a lot of energy from. But obviously to a practical extent, you want to do something that is economically viable in the world. So what I have told people is, look, if you look at the trend of CS over the years, CS had become sort of a tourist industry. It became what banking was I imagine, in the 80s and 90s, where people all wanted it for status and it was an easy way to make money. And, none of us kind of believe that people who are getting a job at some of these big tech companies are actually doing very hard work. They're kind of chilling and I was there. I mean, you can chill and do 20 hours of work a week and coast on a great salary. You can get some promotions. You can easily make your way to 500K. It's a good life. That era is hopefully over, or will soon be strained at the very least. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do CS if you really like it. The big thing that I thought about was the same thing I told you about robotics, which is the beautiful thing about software is it scales very quickly. And things that scale very quickly have a really nice added benefit that if you can make mistakes. You can make mistakes and turn them around in 2 years and then do it again. When you invest in fields that I admire all kinds of the sciences and many other fields, but if you're a physicist and you invest 20 years of your life doing some research and hit a brick wall, I can't imagine that kind of pain. You just went deep into the zone and you were like, maybe I will discover something in quantum physics, and you were like, I guess not. That sucks. Right? With software, you don't often have to do that. You get many at-bats. You can still create amazing businesses. You can move very quickly. You can change your area of expertise, as many people in the field have done in the last 5-10 years. So I think there's some beautiful properties to computer science. If you do not like locking yourself up in a room and coding for 80 hours straight, don't do it.
Well, do you have to code for 80 hours straight today, or do you just talk to Claude and tell Claude to code?
If you don't, I'm a purist in this way. If you don't like the actual thing, there's a core property of things, even when I invest in people that I love a lot, is the love of the game. To VCs means something, to CS in computer engineering sciences means something too. And there is a certain kind of nerd who just excels so much because they're curious. They just want to dig deeper and deeper and deeper, and no matter how many LLMs you give them, they're actually still going to dig deep and deep and really understand, oh, well, that's pretty cool. And I can actually make the LLM do this here. And that thing is broken and I can hack this website by doing this. And for that kind of person, you should absolutely do computer science. But if you're a kind of person who's like, hey, I just want to be a founder because it's high status and I want to start a company and I want to make it worth $1 billion and want to vibe code all day until that happens, probably pick something else.
Well, that dovetails really well into my last question. I could talk to you for hours and I hope we'll do it again soon. Ending on a point of optimism, it is perhaps the best time ever to start a company. The barrier to entry has gotten lower than ever. The tools available are greater than ever. Competition, yes, maybe greater than ever as well. But anybody who wants to build today can build. So I guess I'll ask you this question this way. What is the company that maybe hasn't walked in through your door yet that you hope maybe next week or the week after? What are the kinds of companies you want built that you hope come find you?
I think that one of the biggest problems that is plaguing society today, and you kind of touched upon it with labor shortages, a lot of the fundamentals of the economic systems we live in are innately built on the idea that the economy will grow. The economy typically grows with consumption growth. That consumption growth is probably not going to happen when the population does not grow. The population is not growing. And I think, yeah, sure, even if you weight it for the amount of dollars, it's even worse. I think that is probably going to be the biggest problem, not in our lifetimes, maybe not a venture cycle, but definitely in our lifetimes. And I think humanity typically, when met with very hard problems has found unconventional solutions, often technology solutions. I do think there are tech solutions to that problem. And one of the ones that I am very eager to see the right version of walk through my door is I want to see a company that allows us to be able to create artificial wombs. I just think, my whole theory is like, this is obviously very heretical in many ways, both to religion and many other things, but we have a society where men and women are equal. One of the larger reasons we don't have more kids is because we A, can't afford it, but B, it's a big sacrifice. We can't afford it because a big sacrifice for one of the members of the household to take 9 months off and then care for a baby. So there's a bunch of things that have to be solved to make that work. But one of those things is to be able to have a baby without that. In fact, on the flip side, there are many people who could probably have many babies, but they can't because they only have like one wife. So a lot of our social constructs are, sort of not compatible with the idea of how are we going to do population growth. This is just one idea, but any set of ideas, including the ones that address labor shortage, including the ones that are, how do we figure out child rearing at scale?
Well, I love how far-reaching that is, right? Because you're thinking about a universal problem here that really matters. It's not necessary to one industry or one kind of thing here. The other thing you touched on here is the behavior thing, right? I mean, I think about back to company in 2018 doing IVF when it was still not well understood, maybe a little bit of taboo. People didn't really talk about it. And in the last decade, the acceptance and behavior change, and there's, again, in health, there's plenty of examples, right? GLPs were once shunned, and now every third person is on them. So I hear you there, where this is something that, like, maybe in the moment today is not super well understood, and there may be social stigma and dilemma around it. But that also makes it a really great time to invest in these things, right? When it's not fully well understood and you're willing to do the work, try the product, as it were, it gives you your alpha. So, Deedy, maybe that's a great place for us to leave it today. I really appreciate your openness on these topics, engaging with me, letting me push back on some of this stuff, and I hope we do it again soon.
Of course. Thank you, Jay, for having me. And we should absolutely, I could talk to you for like 3 more hours if you wanted to.
We will do it again soon.